true crime stories that will keep you up at night. Have you ever felt the temperature in a room drop without a single window being open? Why do we instinctively avoid looking into a dark hallway even when we know the house is empty? Is it possible that the silence you hear late at night is actually a sound that your mind is refusing to translate? What if the shadows in the corner of your eye are not optical illusions, but the only parts of a presence that your biological limitations allow you to perceive? And if you are truly alone right now, why does the air behind your neck feel so heavy and dense? You likely believe that your home is a fortress of wood, brick, and glass, a barrier that separates the civilized world from the raw chaos of the unknown. But this is the first expectation we must shatter. A wall is not a shield against what does not occupy physical space. Tonight, we are going to peel back the layers of the American landscape, moving away from the neon glow of the cities and into the suffocating quiet of the rural corridors, where the land remembers things the people have tried to forget. I promise you that by the time we reach the end of this journey, you will no longer look at a closed door as a sign of security, but as a thin veil hiding a much deeper, more terrifying reality. You are now walking through a dense, humid forest in the heart of the Appalachian Trail, where the trees are so old they seem to lean inward, whispering to one another in a language made of creaking bark and snapping twigs. The air here tastes like damp earth and ancient dust, a thick atmosphere that settles in your lungs like lead. You feel the crunch of dried leaves under your boots, but every time you stop to listen, there is an extra footfall that lingers for a fraction of a second too long. It is a slow, rhythmic stalking, a cadence that matches your own heartbeat. The darkness here is not just an absence of light. It is a physical weight, a velvet curtain that absorbs your flashlight's beam before it can touch the ground. You see a cabin in the distance, its silhouette jagged against the gray sky, looking less like a building and more like a wound in the scenery. The wood is gray and weathered, peeling like dead skin, and the windows are dark, vacant eyes watching your approach. As you step onto the porch, the wood groans with a high-pitched, metallic shriek that vibrates through the solace of your feet. You are not a guest here. You are an intruder in a space that has long since transitioned from a shelter to a monument of isolation. The organization of this place was once meant for survival, but now every beam and every floorboard serves a different purpose, to trap the echoes of what happened inside. You feel a sudden, sharp chill, a cold so intense it feels like a needle pressing against your skin, even though the night air is warm. This is the first layer of the manifestation, the moment where the environment begins to reject the living. You are being watched by something that does not breathe, yet you can hear the faint, wet sound of a lung expanding somewhere in the rafters above you. This is the reality of the American Gothic, a place where the history of the land is written in shadows and screams that never quite faded away. The transition from the porch to the interior of the house feels like crossing a border between two different eras of existence. As you push the door open, the scent of the forest is instantly replaced by the smell of stagnant time. A mixture of mothballs, old copper, and something metallic that reminds you of a nosebleed. The air inside is unnaturally still, yet it carries a vibration. A low-frequency hum that you feel in your teeth, rather than hear in your ears. This house, like many structures scattered across the American Midwest, was built with a logic of rigid utility, designed to keep the harsh winters out and the family warmth in. But as you move through the narrow hallway, you realize the architecture has warped. The walls seem to lean inward, narrowing your field of vision, and the ceiling feels dangerously low, as if the house itself is trying to compress your presence into a smaller, more manageable shape. You are now a witness to the anatomy of isolation. Your eyes adjust to the gloom, revealing furniture draped in white sheets that look like slumped, faceless figures sitting in the corners of the room. The floorboards are covered in a thin layer of fine, gray silt that records no footprints, but your own. Yet there are dragging marks in the dust that lead toward the basement door. You hear a sound of slow, deliberate scratching coming from inside the walls. The sound of long fingernails tracing the path of the electrical wiring. It is the sound of something trying to understand the pulse of a house that no longer has a heart. In this environment, the silence is a predator. It waits for you to make a noise so it can show you how loud the void can be. You reach out to touch a wooden banister, and the texture is oily, leaving a residue on your skin that feels like a cold burn. This is the structural decay of the soul, where the physical boundaries of the world begin to dissolve, allowing the entities of the peripheral to seep into the material. You realize that the isolation of this place was not accidental. It was a choice made by the land itself to keep this specific darkness contained within four walls. Every shadow here has a density, a thickness that makes it difficult to move through the room, as if the darkness is resisting your passage. You are not just looking at a room. You are looking at a memory that has refused to die. A moment of terror that has been looped for decades, gathering strength in the dark. As you ascend the staircase, each step emits a sharp, rhythmic crackle that echoes through the hollow skeleton of the house, sounding less like wood and more like the snapping of dry bone. You stop halfway up, paralyzed by the sudden, absolute conviction that someone is standing exactly 3 inches behind you. You don't turn around. You can feel the radiant cold emanating from their presence, a freezing draft that makes the fine hairs on your arms stand like needles. The air here has become thick, almost gelatinous, making every breath a conscious effort of will. You are experiencing the weight of unseen eyes, a psychological phenomenon that, in this corridor, has transitioned into a physical assault. In the upstairs hallway, the doors are all slightly ajar, creating a series of black vertical slits that seem to blink as you pass them. There is a sound now, a soft, wet whistling, like air being drawn through a throat filled with fluid. It is coming from the master bedroom at the end of the hall. You move toward it, your boots sinking into the carpet which feels unnaturally soft and damp, as if the floor beneath is saturated with a liquid that never dries. The wallpaper is peeling in long, rhythmic strips, revealing the dark lath underneath, looking like the exposed ribs of a giant, dying beast. You notice that the mirrors in this house have all been painted over with thick, black oil, yet you can still see a distorted reflection of yourself moving beneath the surface of the paint. It is a version of you that moves a second slower than your actual body, a delayed echo of your existence. This is where the stability of your reality begins to fracture. You realize that in this space, the past does not follow the future. They exist simultaneously, layered like sheets of transparent glass. The entities here are not ghosts in the traditional sense. They are stains on the fabric of time, structural anomalies that feed on the energy of your observation. You can hear the sound of a child's laughter, but it is distorted, slowed down to a guttural, mechanical moan that vibrates the very glass in the window frames. The curtains flutter, though the air is dead still, moving with a frantic, jerky motion as if something invisible is trying to hide behind the fabric. You are no longer just an observer. The environment has begun to react to your heat, your pulse, and your fear. The house is a machine built to process human dread, and you have just become its primary fuel. Every shadow is now stretching toward you, elongating with a predatory intent. As the light from your lantern begins to flicker and dim, struggling against an atmosphere that consumes photons. Leaving the hallway, you enter the master bedroom, where the air is so thin it feels like inhaling needles. The darkness here has a different quality. It is granular shimmery was the edges of bed frame. This is the heart of the structural rot. A place where the barrier between the physical and the metaphysical has been worn down by decades of concentrated grief. You notice the way the light from your source refuses to touch the center of the bed, curving around an invisible mass that displaces the very atmosphere of the room. There is a rhythmic thudding beneath the floor, a slow, mechanical heartbeat that suggests the house itself has developed a primitive nervous system. You are witnessing the ultimate consequence of isolation. When a space is left without human life for too long, it begins to generate its own distorted version of it. The wallpaper in this room isn't just peeling. It is pulsating, the floral patterns shifting and rearranging themselves into the shapes of gasping mouths and wide, lidless eyes. You hear a sound like a heavy chain being dragged across a velvet floor. A sound that should be loud but arrives at your ears as a muffled, distant echo. It is the sound of a burden that cannot be put down. You realize that the stability of the ceiling above you is an illusion. The beams are groaningly tired, held together not by nails and gravity, but by the sheer tension of the entities that reside here. You feel a sudden, violent shove against your shoulder, but there is no one there. The air simply hardened for a second, turning into a solid wall of kinetic energy. This is the transition from observation to interaction. The house is no longer content to let you watch. It is starting to test your physical limits, measuring the density of your fear to see if it can break you. You see a shadow move independently of any light source, a tall, spindly figure that detaches itself from the closet door and glides toward the window. It doesn't walk. It simply displaces the space it occupies, leaving a trail of frost on the floorboards that smokes in the humid air. The temperature drops so low that your breath becomes a thick cloud, obscuring your vision and creating a white veil between you and the exit. You are trapped in a moment of atmospheric paralysis, where every choice you make feels like moving through deep, freezing water. The white veil of your own breath hangs in the air, like a ghost. A physical manifestation of your internal heat being drained by the room's hungry atmosphere. You are now standing in the center of a space that has lost its connection to the outside world, where the passage of time is no longer measured by seconds, but by the slow, agonizing drip of condensation from the ceiling. This liquid is dark and viscous, smelling of rust and old, forgotten sickness, and as it hits the floorboards, it doesn't splash. It sinks into the wood as if the house were drinking it. You are experiencing the cold cadence of presence, a state where the silence becomes so loud it begins to sound like a choir of discordant voices. Screaming just below the threshold of human hearing, the shadows are no longer passive. They are crawling up your legs, a sensation like cold spiders skittering over your skin, seeking the warmth of your blood. You try to move toward the door, but the floor seems to elongate, the exit receding into a pinpoint of light that feels miles away. This is the structural manipulation of a hunting ground. Every element of the room, the heavy wardrobe, the cracked wash basin, the iron bed frame is being utilized to create a sense of total entrapment. You hear a voice, a dry, papery whisper that calls your name, but it isn't coming from the room. It is coming from inside your own skull, vibrating against your brain. It is the sound of a memory that isn't yours, a fragment of the person who died in this room decades ago, trying to find a way to use your vocal cords to scream one last time. You notice the light from your lantern is now a deep, bruised purple, failing to illuminate even your own hands. You are losing the ability to distinguish between your body and the environment, as the edges of your silhouette begin to blur into the surrounding dark. The air is now so dense that you can feel it pressing against your eyeballs, a physical pressure that demands you close your eyes and surrender to the void. But you know that if you blink, the entity standing in the corner, the one that has been slowly unfolding its impossibly long limbs, will be standing directly in front of you when you open them. This is the moment of peak sensory saturation, where the terror becomes a physical weight that threatens to crush your ribs and stop your heart. Escaping the bedroom, you find yourself at the top of the cellar stairs, a descent that looks like a vertical tunnel into the very throat of the earth. The air rising from below is different. It is ancient, carrying the scent of limestone, wet fur, and a metallic sharpness that signals the presence of a predator. As you descend, the wooden stairs give way to cold, damp stone, and the walls become slick with a black fungus that seems to pulse with a slow, rhythmic light. You are entering the echoes of the forgotten, the basement level where the house's secrets were buried and left to ferment into something far more dangerous than simple ghosts. This is the organization of the invisible, a space where the entity has constructed a hive of psychic residue. You see old mason jars lined up on wooden shelves, filled with murky liquids and objects that look disturbingly like human teeth and hair. Each jar represents a tether, a way for the spirits to remain anchored to this physical plane. The sound down here is a constant, low-frequency thrumming, the sound of the earth itself groaning under the weight of the house's malevolence. You see a shadow move behind a furnace that looks like a rusted iron ribcage, and for the first time, you see eyes not human eyes, but two pinpricks of cold, white light that do not blink. They are calculating your fear, measuring the electrical output of your nervous system like a predator assessing its prey. The fragility of your logic is now fully exposed. You cannot explain this with science. You cannot hide from it with reason. You are in a realm where the rules of the living are discarded in favor of the laws of the eternal. The darkness here doesn't just block your sight. It enters your mouth, tasting of ash and old copper, trying to fill your lungs so you can no longer cry for help. You realize that the basement isn't just a part of the house. It is a gateway, a place where the barrier between the dirt and the spirit has completely dissolved, allowing the house to feed directly on the energy of the soil. As you stand in the damp darkness of the cellar, the contrast between the world you knew and this hollow reality becomes a physical ache. You remember the sun, the sound of traffic, and the safety of a locked door, but here, those concepts are as thin as smoke. The stability you once relied on has been replaced by a terrifying scarcity of hope. You are surrounded by the remains of a life that was slowly consumed by this place rusty tools, broken toys, and a single, rocking chair that moves back and forth with a violent, jerky motion despite the lack of any wind. The chair's rhythmic thud against the stone floor sounds like a countdown. A ticking clock marking the seconds until your own identity is subsumed by the house. You see the walls start to bleed a thick, black ichor that moves with a purpose, flowing toward your feet like a slow-moving river of ink. It is trying to bind you to the floor, to make you a permanent fixture of this architectural nightmare. The temperature has reached a point of absolute stasis. A cold so profound it feels like fire, searing your skin and numbing your mind. This is the structural reality of a haunting. It is a slow-motion car crash that never ends, a moment of impact stretched out over a century. You realize that the entities here are not seeking revenge. They are seeking a vessel, a way to experience the warmth of a pulse once more. The fragility of your heartbeat is the most valuable thing in this room, a tiny spark of heat in an ocean of eternal frost. Every breath you take is a defiance against the void, but with each exhale, you feel a little more of your soul being pulled out of your body and into the cracks in the walls. You are being dismantled, layer by layer, until all that will remain is a shadow on the stone and a memory of a name that no one will ever speak again. The house is winning, not through violence, but through the sheer, overwhelming weight of its own existence. The density of the void has now reached its breaking point. The walls of the cellar begin to vibrate so violently that the jars on the shelves shatter, raining glass and ancient dust onto the floor. But the sound of the breaking glass is silent. The atmosphere has become so thick that sound can no longer travel through it. You are in a vacuum of terror. Suddenly, the darkness in front of you coalesces into a solid form. A figure made of negative space that is darker than the surrounding gloom. It has Nufasi only shifting surface of gray static that reflects your own deepest fears back at you. You feel a hand or something that feels like a hand made of frozen smoke reach into your chest. It doesn't break the skin. It passes through your ribs like they are made of water, grasping your heart with a grip that is both agonizingly cold and strangely familiar. In this moment of total climax, you realize the truth. This house is not haunted by others, but by the potential for darkness that exists within everyone who enters it. The entities are mirrors, reflecting the isolation, the grief, and the hidden rot of the human condition. The structural decay you saw in the wood and stone is a reflection of the decay of the spirit when it is cut off from the light of connection. You are the architect of your own nightmare, and the house is simply the medium through which you are forced to witness it. The figure draws closer, its faceless head tilting with a curiosity that is devoid of any mercy. You can feel your consciousness being pulled toward that gray static, a siren song of oblivion that promises an end to the fear at the cost of your very existence. The air around you begins to glow with a sickly, phosphorescent light, revealing that the entire cellar is covered in thousands of tiny, etched names, the names of everyone who has ever stood where you are standing, everyone who the house has already claimed. The residual shadow of the experience begins to settle as the violent vibration subsides, leaving you in a state of hollowed-out clarity. The figure has not vanished, but it has become transparent. A lingering stain on your vision that reminds you of how close you came to the edge. You begin to understand the philosophical weight of this place. This isn't just a story about a haunted house. It is a document of the human shadow, the part of our collective psyche that we refuse to acknowledge. We build our cities and our lives on the surface, ignoring the deep, dark roots that connect us to the primordial fear of the unknown. The isolation of the American landscape provides the perfect canvas for these shadows to manifest. Away from the distracting noise of the modern world, you move back toward the stairs, your body feeling incredibly light, as if a part of your weight was left behind in that cold grip. The climb back to the surface is an ascent through layers of realization. You see the house now not as a monster, but as a teacher. A brutal reminder that safety is a fragile construct and that the walls we build to protect ourselves are often the very things that trap us with our own darkness. The light of the moon is beginning to filter through the cracks in the boarded-up windows of the ground floor. And it looks different now, colder, more distant, like the light of a star that died 1,000,000 years ago. You realize that you will never truly leave this house. A part of your awareness will always remain in that cellar, watching the rocking chair move in the dark, waiting for the next person to walk through the door. The transition from the concrete to the symbolic is complete. You are no longer just a person. You are a witness to the eternal struggle between the spark of life and the encroaching void. Stepping back out onto the porch, the forest air hits you like a physical blow, a sudden rush of warmth and humidity that feels like being born again. The trees are still there. The shadows are still long, but the silence has changed. It is no longer the silence of a predator, but the silence of a witness that has seen you survive. You walk away from the house, and with every step, the structure seems to shrink, losing its predatory geometry and becoming once again just a pile of rotting wood and rusted iron. But you know better. You know that the architecture of fear is permanent, and that the maps of the world are full of these black holes where logic goes to die. This journey was never about curiosity. It was about the revelation of the layers that exist beneath the skin of our reality. You have seen the anatomy of the unseen, felt the pulse of the void, and emerged with a deeper, more terrifying understanding of what it means to be truly alone in a universe that is far more populated than we dare to admit. The American Gothic is not a myth. It is a living, breathing parasite that feeds on the stories we are to foretell. As you reach the edge of the forest, and the first glow of the morning sun begins to bleed over the horizon, you feel a final, cold shiver pass through your spine, a parting gift from the house. A reminder that it is still there, and it is always watching. Confira se já é inscrito neste canal para continuar explorando os recônditos mais sombrios da experiência humana. Pois somente aqueles que têm a coragem de olhar para o abismo podem verdadeiramente entender a luz. Se você assistiu até aqui é porque gostou desse caso. Deixe um comentário dizendo eu assisti até aqui, para que eu possa te conhecer e saber quem realmente gosta das histórias aqui do canal. Curta este vídeo para fortalecer nossa busca pelas verdades que se escondem no escuro e compartilhe esta experiência com aqueles que não têm medo de enfrentar o que rasteja nas sombras de nossa própria existência.